Hey everyone, so as we all know, the story of One Piece is pretty cleanly split into two halves, pre and post Timeskip. Now, when I was a young, weekly reader of the Marineford arc, and I got to the end, I actually did not like it that the Straw Hats were going to go train and get stronger off-screen for 2 years. The reason being that while so many other series did do training arcs, and did time skips where the characters would come back stronger than before, what I had always loved about One Piece was that we got to see every step of their growth every arc. Pretty much all of their combat growth would happen during fights. So I really liked the fact that they would have to get stronger through combat rather than just being told that they went and got stronger off screen. Now that I'm older, I actually realized that the time skip was a brilliant decision, mainly for narrative reasons, what it did for the overarching conflict, how it splits the story into two very distinct acts, and so on. In fact, One Piece probably has the most clearly planned out 2-act story structure of any long-running series I've ever seen, with the literal geography of the world clearly marking out the two halves of the story from the start. Not to mention that, in retrospect, having the seemingly free-flowing journey have to take a hard pause partway through makes the impacts of the events of Sabaody and Marineford carry a lot more weight for the main characters than if they just kind of got right back to adventuring after all of the dust settled. So narratively speaking, yes, the time skip was great, but I've still seen some people question logistically, practically speaking, in-universe for the characters, was the time skip actually necessary? Did the Straw Hats need to train to get stronger? Because yes, during Sabaody and Marineford, we were shown how drastically far off the Straw Hats were from the strong figures waiting in the New World. At that point in time, it seemed very clear that they would need to be a lot stronger just to be able to survive. However, as we saw later on, the other supernovas who went straight to the New World and did not spend 2 years training were all able to survive. And not just survive, they were able to actually still become fairly notorious, somewhat successful pirates in the New World. So, an interesting hypothetical to think about would be, what would happen if the Straw Hats just regrouped after Marineford and went straight onwards to the New World? Because I actually think that unlike the other supernovas, the Straw Hats very likely would not have survived in the New World without the time skip, which may sound weird, but hear me out and you may agree with me by the end. But first, make sure to subscribe for more One Piece content every week. So, first of all, I don't think it's weird that the other supernovas survived without training. I don't think that's an inconsistency. Let me clear that up. Because, despite all the hyping up of the New World beforehand, at the end of the day, I don't think, and listen carefully, I don't think the basic level of the New World is that high compared to the Grand Line. What do I mean by basic level? Well, I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty power scaling here, so this is more so just broad observations. And that's that the typical day-to-day average pirate, or maybe even average nation in the New World, isn't anything crazy from what we saw before. So first, let's roll it back and talk about the East Blue to Grand Line transition a little bit to demonstrate what I mean. Before we got to the Grand Line, we were told over and over that it's the pirate's graveyard. Even one of the strongest pirate crews from East Blue could barely last a week here, etc, etc. However, once we get to the Grand Line, it's not as though every pirate they run into is like as strong as Arlong or something. In fact, it's a decent while before Luffy has to actually fight someone who is definitively stronger than Arlong, even after visiting multiple Grand Line islands. I don't think that random pirate crews we see on random islands are particularly strong either. It's not like just because this is the Grand Line, suddenly the East Blue Straw Hats are just going to have a ridiculous amount of trouble with anyone they run into. Again, the first time that it really felt like, okay, this is the Grand Line, this is what they warned us about, was when Luffy finally ran into Crocodile and just got completely wrecked in a chapter fittingly titled Grand Line Level. And to me, that's really what changes between East Blue and the Grand Line, is that the ceiling goes way up. Now you're in the same ocean as guys like Mihawk, like Crocodile, sometimes admirals like Aokiji, so on and so forth. So now just the probability of possibly running into someone like that becomes higher. It's not like everyone in the Grand Line is a monster. I wouldn't be surprised if the floor of the typical Grand Line pirate isn't that far off from what we were already seeing in one of the 4 blues. For example, even someone Zoro easily beat in East Blue like Hachi, he's shown to be no pushover even in the Grand Line. It's more so the fact that now, as opposed to East Blue, in the Grand Line the chances of running into monsters that are just way out of the typical Pirates League have gone way up. That and the weather, natural calamities, etc. But point being, it's not like everyone who makes it through the Grand Line and gets into the New World is that strong. I mean, even these guys were about ready to go there. So similarly, I feel like the New World is the same deal. where I think the floor where you can just be a pirate and survive in the New World isn't anything crazy. Yes, the number of extremely strong characters who are also sailing around goes way up, of course, in the New World, so there's a much higher chance of just getting wrecked by a Yonko officer you run into or something. But the fact is that we've still seen that there are plenty of fodder alive and well in the New World, thriving. The New World is a huge place, and just because there are a lot of crazy strong characters out there doesn't mean that the range of strength doesn't still run seemingly the full spectrum. Like, not only can you be a fodder and survive in the New World, we saw from the Corridor Coliseum that even a lot of supposedly well-renowned fighters in the New World weren't all that crazy. Obviously, this is post-Timeskip Luffy who is toying with these guys. I'm talking about the generic guys, not the Grand Fleet guys. But pre-Timeskip Luffy would definitely be stronger than the average gladiator in this Coliseum, despite this being, one of, if not the biggest tournaments in the New World. And we can take it a step further. Look at the pirates who would be threats to entire islands in the New World, like Brownbeard. Brownbeard was nothing compared to pre-Timeskip Basil Hawkins. I assume the Straw Hats would have taken care of Brownbeard easily as well. Pinkbeard got beat by amped up Moda the Milkmaid. Apparently an entire country in the New World is no match for Diesel. And lastly, we were outright told that as soon as the supernovas showed up in the New World, they were immediately wreaking havoc and making big waves, without any training needed. Basically, from the jump, these rookies straight from Sabaody weren't doing too bad. So the bottom line is that too often I see people talk about how the Straw Hats weren't New World level, which is just a very vague term, doesn't really mean anything. Even just the idea that someone is a pirate from the New World or a fighter from the New World, that alone doesn't mean that much. The New World is still filled with a lot of characters that aren't that strong. Plenty of characters that the pre-Timeskip Straw Hats would have completely wrecked. As a side note, I do think that in general we will get better comparisons, more concrete comparisons in terms of how well, the pre-Timeskip Straw Hats would have fared in the New World once we get to see the Pacifistas in action again. The reason being that Pacifistas just make for a very good benchmark for pre- and post-Timeskip comparisons. We did get to see the entire Straw Hat crew pre-Timeskip were roughly equal to one Pacifista. So I think that anytime we see a Pacifista in action in the New World, that does give us a measuring stick to the pre-Timeskip Straw Hats. Characters the Straw Hats fought in the past like Lucci and Crocodile, they have gotten most likely stronger at this point, so they won't make good benchmarks, but Pacifistas, they're good old-fashioned machines. And while we do hear that there are now some upgraded versions running around, the old versions of Pacifistas also still seem to be around, as we are specifically told that these are the same versions the Straw Hats once fought at Sabaody. But, that tangent aside, I think it is reasonably fair to say that the gap between the pre-Timeskip Straw Hats and whatever people call New World level is somewhat exaggerated. I don't think it really even means anything, since the Straw Hats, as they were, would have been a problem for a lot of the average pirates in the New World regardless of any sort of training, any sort of 2-year time skip. With all that being said, in that case, why then do I still maintain that the Straw Hats would have been crushed in the New World? Honestly, very possibly within the first week or so. Why do I say that even though all the other supernovas were able to enter the New World at their pre-time skip levels, survive for 2 years, make a big name for themselves, and end up getting fairly strong simply through experience, why then couldn't the Straw Hats have done that? Well, let's quickly recap. Yes, the stronger characters of the New World, the top Marines, Yonko top fighters and such, they would have destroyed the Straw Hats if they ran into them, but the Straw Hats, even at their pre-time skip levels, would still have been relatively stronger than a lot of the typical New World crews that we see, and we can see from the other supernovas that it is completely possible to simply get stronger over 2 years living in the New World to become significant forces in the New World, without having to train for 2 years straight. As such, the real reason that I'm claiming that the Straw Hats would have died had they gone straight to the New World is because it's not just about strength or capability or growth rate. It comes down to a fundamental difference in approach, really fundamental flaws that the Straw Hats have, well, generally portrayed as positive character traits, but in the practical logistic sense, still objectively problematic traits for survival that the Straw Hats have. Here's why it makes sense that every other supernova can survive 2 years in the New World without training, but the Straw Hats would have died fast. Why did the entire incident at Sabaody happen in the first place? It's not like, oh no, such unfortunate bad luck for the Straw Hats, running into Kizaru and Kuma right out of the blue. No, the Straw Hats actively brought down that hammer upon themselves. This wasn't an accident, this wasn't bad luck. It's not like the Straw Hats didn't know what was going to happen next. they brought the hammer down on themselves. Because the Straw Hats, more than any other crew, not just the Supernova, but any other crew we've seen in the series, period, the Straw Hats do whatever they want without regard for consequences. That is simply the way their captain works, and the rest of the crew follows suit. They are by far the most free-spirited pirate crew for that very reason. That is why we love them, why we love to follow them. They are wildly reckless. They do what they want with regard for the rules or what might happen to them next. They do what they feel is right or should be done in any given situation. That's what led them to taking on a Shichibukai when they had barely come out of East Blue. That's what led them to challenging a god. That's what led them to taking on the world government, and so on. However, upon punching the world noble, Luffy was finally hit with the reality check of here's what happens when you're too weak and you get in over your head. The whole crew got a huge reality check that they are too weak for the New World. But this whole incident also illustrated the biggest difference between the Straw Hats and the other Supernovas. They just don't operate with the same sense of danger that other pirate crews do. And to double down on that, the Straw Hats have an extremely strong sense of morality that makes them ignore what little sense of danger they would otherwise have. Yes, Straw Hats like Nami and Usopp do normally have a strong sense of danger, and will strongly attempt to steer Luffy away from dangerous, reckless ventures, but not when something they feel is important is on the line. Even Usopp is ready to head straight to Enies Lobby when he hears that Robin has been taken captive. Nami is usually the voice of reason that you can count on to usually steer Luffy away from his stupidest decisions. But when the biggest voice of reason on the crew would gladly attack an admiral head-on for a friend, that's pretty much a crew that's got zero real sense of danger. Nami's first instinct was also to go directly to Enies Lobby and steal Robin back when she heard what Robin did for them. This is not a crew that cares about what their supposed odds of survival are when they make up their mind to do something, they just do it. And we see that here, again, no one in the crew cared that Luffy punched a world noble and now an admiral was coming for their heads. They're all just on board with it. So yes, the captain is crazy, but everyone else on his crew happily enables him. That's why the Straw Hats are responsible for so many unprecedented incidents, breaking into Enies Lobby, Impel Down, punching a world noble, etc., etc. And we are shown that even the other Supernova can't really comprehend how reckless these guys are, and so that's the fundamental difference. The Straw Hats would not have survived in the New World because they don't have a brain, they don't have a real sense of caution. 1 minute Nami might be warning Luffy not to go to the scary looking island, the next minute she's calmly spearheading a mission to invade an emperor's territory because she feels guilty about Sanji. Most of the other Supernovas do not act like this. Look at someone like Law, who is very rational and calculating and who basically plotted out the safest 2-year plan to accomplish his goals, getting himself safely set up as Shichibukai before making his move. Look at Capone Beige, who survived those 2 years but only by joining Big Mom's crew. X-Drake, same thing, very clear plan. Join the Beast Pirates under orders from the Marines. Apu survived by just giving in and agreeing to work for Kaido. Basil Hawkins' entire ability revolves around projecting how dangerous a certain course of action is and then making a logical decision based off of that. All of these Supernovas are terrible comparisons for how the Straw Hats would have acted in the New World because the Straw Hats are just too reckless. The only crew that they can be somewhat compared to is Kid's crew, because Kid so far has been portrayed as the Supernova with the most similar degree of determination and recklessness as Luffy. He has at this point already directly challenged 3 of the 4 emperors. And guess what? Kid has had a very rough time in the New World. He has suffered some real beatdowns, he has lost an arm, nearly lost his first mate, etc. Take whatever experiences Kid has gone through and imagine that the Straw Hats would have had it way worse, probably being completely wiped out at this point because Luffy is even more reckless than Kid. Even Kid couldn't believe what Luffy did at Sabaody. So all that is to say that the Straw Hats, with their trend of picking fights with the toughest guys around, without really thinking about the consequences, they had basically pushed that past the limit by the end of pre-Timeskip, and were essentially at a point where if they kept going the way they were, doing what they normally do, they would basically die from the next stupid thing they did. So the way that I see it, with all the training they did, it was just enough to set them up so that they could go to the New World and then go back to being stupid, while now being strong enough that they at least have a chance at not immediately dying. By the way, that's not me analyzing some deeper messages of the story, to be clear. That's just how I view it from a personal standpoint of why their training makes sense logistically to me. It got them to just the right level, the level where they have the freedom to be stupid again. If they did no training, then they would still probably do the first thing they did upon reaching the New World, which would be to go to the most dangerous island that Luffy sees, probably run up against Caesar and be mad because he's drugging kids, challenge him, and immediately die because no one knows hockey yet. Or, if Caesar hasn't yet started his base of operations there, maybe the Strahds just run straight into the middle of Akainu and Aokiji's fight and die. Use your imaginations, there's a ton of things in the New World that could kill them at their pre-timeskip level, and they're just not going to be as careful with avoiding them as the other supernovas were. That's why the Straw Hats would absolutely have been the first supernova crew to die in the New World. So if you enjoyed this video, then definitely like, comment, and subscribe, and you can support me on Patreon to get my extended thoughts on this and all future topics.